You probably clicked on this video because you saw the title and the thumbnail. Now, the first story that you see is very different. Was Tim lying in the way he framed this video? Why, the article from Dallas News says Texas doctor stole coronavirus vaccine to give to his family and friends, authorities say. An attorney for Hassan Gokal says the since fired public health director was making sure unused doses didn't go to waste. The story is from January 21st, 2021. The story now that we're getting from the New York Times. The vaccine had to be used. He used it. He was fired. 10 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine would expire within hours. So a Houston doctor gave it to people with medical conditions, including his wife. What followed was, quote, the lowest moment in my life, Dr. Hassan Gokal said. Why was this man punished for giving vaccines to people minutes before they were going to expire? The gist of the story, and we'll read through this. He had some vaccines. They have an expiration date. They have to be refrigerated for a certain amount of time. And when he saw that they were about to go bad, he immediately started making calls to people who desperately needed the vaccine. He gave one to his wife. He was called out because they noticed too many Indian names. So they say, no joke, too many Indian names. Why are they punishing him? I'll tell you what I think. I think it's because they have long pushed for racial quotas. Take a look at this story from the New York Post, July 16, 2020. The lunatic drive for racial quotas for COVID-19 vaccinations. And I have more stories on this. They've been doing it. Based on this story, it sounds like you have a doctor who had a tough choice. Either they go bad or I use them. And they noticed this list has too many people with Indian names, therefore no diversity. So they're punishing him. I believe he's actually facing criminal charges for stealing. His lawyers are now pushing back, saying they were going to go bad anyway. There's several things to break down in this story. First and foremost, the horrifying reality of equity. This idea that everyone must be equal all the time, no matter what, disregarding individual choice, disregarding a community's choice. I agree there's problems. I'd like to see everybody get access to the vaccine. But this idea that this man was caught simply because they noticed Indian names or there was something about it that wasn't diverse enough is insane. But we also have a couple other issues. One, media framing. In the story from the New York Times, they make him out to be a hero, a victim. It's interesting. Maybe he's not. The story from Dallas News says he stole the vaccine to give to his family and friends. Maybe that's true. Which story do you believe? They're both certified by NewsGuard. They can't both be true. Either this man is a thief who stole vaccines to give to his family and friends. That's why there were so many Indian names, they claim. Or maybe he's telling the truth with the New York Times when he said it was going to go in the gutter. The media choose who's the hero and who's the villain. But more importantly than all of this, I think the rigidity of the system is something we absolutely need to talk about. I've long complained about the lack of humanity in these systems. Here's a guy. He's got vaccines. They're going to expire. Give them to whoever you can. Now, my understanding is he's not the only one who's gotten in trouble for something similar to this. There were other doctors who realized that with only hours left before this would go bad, they decided to give it to people they thought needed it. And here we go. This is a doctor who did the right thing. Why waste the vaccine? Well, it's the rigidity in the system. Everything must flow in a very specific way. You go to court, you get a ticket. The judge says, well, that's the system. No room for humanity, for compassion. Now, that's not the scariest thing to me because that's it's in the system. It's been that way my whole life. You'll get pulled over. The cop doesn't care what your reason was for doing what you did. Just that, you know what? If I give you a ticket, if I arrest you, you get arrested. Maybe you're speeding because you got to go to the bathroom really bad and you're in a tough spot. Well, a compassionate cop might be like, I'll follow you, go quick. I get it. We want to make sure you're safe, not putting other people at risk, but I can understand why you're rushing. Or, you have that narrative of a pregnant wife in the car and the cop's like, I'll give you an escort. But there are a lot of cops just like, I don't care. Tell it to a judge. And I've experienced that. In this instance, we need to recognize there has to be some flexibility. Now, the scarier thing beyond that, okay, is the racial quotas. Let me read you the story. The New York Times reports the Texas doctor had 6 hours. Now that a vial of COVID-19 vaccine had been opened on this late December night, He had to find 10 eligible people for its remaining doses before the precious medicine expired in 6 hours. Scrambling, the doctor made house calls and directed people to his home outside Houston. Some were acquaintances, others strangers. A bed-bound nonagenarian, a woman in her 80s with dementia, a mother with a child who uses a ventilator. After midnight, and with just minutes before the vaccine became unusable, the Dr. Hassan Gokul gave the last dose to his wife, who has a pulmonary disease that leaves her short of breath. For his actions, Dr. Gokul was fired from his governmental job and then charged with stealing 10 vaccine doses worth a total of $135, a shun-worthy misdemeanor that sent his name and mugshot rocketing around the globe. It was my world coming down, Dr. Gokul said in a telephone interview on Friday. To have everything collapse on you, God, it was the lowest moment of my life. They say the matter of Dr. Gokul is playing out as a pandemic-wary pandemic-wary Americans scour websites and cross state lines chasing rumors, all in anxious pursuit of a medicine in short supply. The case opens wide to interpretation, becoming a study in the learn-as-you-go bioethics of the country's stumbling vaccine rollout. Late last month, the judge dismissed the charge as groundless, after which the local district attorney vowed to present the matter to a grand jury. And while prosecutors portray the doctor as a cold opportunist, his lawyer says he acted responsibly, even heroically. Everybody was looking at this guy and saying, I got my mother waiting for a vaccine, my grandfather waiting for a vaccine. The lawyer, Paul Doyle, said they were thinking this guy is a villain. Dr. Gokul, 48, immigrated from Pakistan as a boy and earned a medical degree at SUNY Upstate Medical University in Syracuse. After working at hospitals in central New York, he moved to Texas in 2009 to oversee the emergency department at a suburban Houston hospital. His volunteer work has included rebuilding homes and providing medical care after Hurricane Harvey in 2017. And they go on to describe a bit more about his life I'm not super interested in. He goes on to say, I was petrified to go home and bring COVID to my wife. I mean, the guy's a doctor, right? Fortunately, said the Harris County Public Health Department recruited him in April to become the medical doctor for its COVID response team. The job paid less, but he was eager to protect his wife by limiting his exposure to the coronavirus in emergency rooms. On December 22nd, Dr. Gokul joined a conference call in which state health officials explained the protocols for administering the recently approved Moderna vaccine. The 10 or 11 doses in a vial are viable for 6 hours after the seal is punctured. Dr. Gokul said the advice was to vaccinate people eligible under the 1A category, healthcare workers and residents in long-term care facilities, then those under the 1B category, people over 65 or with a health condition that increases risk of severe COVID-related illness. After that, he said, the message was, just put it in people's arms. We don't want any doses going to waste, period. Now, that's great. That doesn't fall into the racial quota narrative. That's the just get people what they need if they need it. Now, that's good. And they go on to mention the story about what actually happened. But let's say this. Let's move on to the part about the equity. They say hours were counting down. The doctor figured that if he returned the open vial to its department, almost certainly empty office at this late hour, it would go to waste. So he started the drive home in a neighboring county. He called people in his cell phone's contact list to ask whether they had older relatives or neighbors needing to be immunized. No one I was really intimately familiar with, Dr. Gokul said. I wasn't that close to anyone. When he reaches home in Sugarland, waiting outside were a woman in her mid-60s with cardiac issues and a woman in her early 70s with assorted health problems, he inoculated both. 8 doses to go. Now let's scroll down and make sure we get to the point, because I'm not going to follow everything having to do with everyone he vaccinated, but let's get to this point. Several days later, the doctor said that a supervisor and the human resources director summoned him to ask whether he had administered 10 doses outside of the scheduled event on December 29th. He said he had, in keeping with guidelines not to waste the vaccine, and was promptly fired. The officials maintained that he had violated protocol and should have returned the remaining doses to the office or thrown them away, the doctor recalled. He also said that one of the officials startled him by questioning the lack of equity among those he had vaccinated. Now, is this possibly the real issue? In my opinion, the answer is yes. Quote, are you suggesting that there were too many Indian names in that group? Dr. Gokul said he asked. Exactly, he was told. Elizabeth Perez, the director of communications for Harris County Public Health, said the department was unable to comment on its protocols, the December 29th vaccination event, or the Gokul case. On January 21st, about 2 weeks after the doctor's termination, a friend called to say that a local reporter had just tweeted about him At that very moment, one of his 3 children answered the door, 2 bright lights, and a thrust microphone. Shaken, the 16-year-old boy closed the door and said, "Dad, there are people out there with cameras." This was how Dr. Gokal learned that he had been charged with stealing vaccine doses. Why was this a big issue? Well, depending on who you ask, they'll tell you equity, or they'll tell you no equity, I guess. James Lindsay, he's one of the preeminent critical race theorist critics, I guess. And he tweeted about this, highlighting the equity portion of this, how they want racial quotas, meaning if you deviate from their racial quotas, you are creating inequity. That's a problem. Someone responded saying, no, this is about racism towards a Pakistani doctor, because if it was a white man who did it, well, then, people would have let it slide, which I'm pretty sure isn't the case, because I think there was a similar story about a white doctor who did something similar, not exactly the same. I don't think that's true. I think what we're seeing is the perverse ideology of critical race theory and how they have been continually pushing for race-based quotas. The LA Times is a story how race factors into decisions about who should get priority for COVID-19 vaccines. They want everyone to be equal. They want race-based policy, which is racism, which will make racism substantially worse. And it is. That means you could go to the doctor because you desperately need some kind of medication, and they'll say, sorry, we won't be giving this medication to you because of the way you look. That's really the big problem here. The diversity that the left pushes is about appearance. We were told over and over again not to judge a book by its cover. Now we have a modern left saying we should literally give out vaccines based on the cover of the book. If you need the vaccine and you're there and the doctor has it and it's going to go bad, you should get it. The problem then is you will see a disproportionate amount of one race getting the vaccine over the other. And because the psychotic zealot cult is controlling cultural institutions and it's getting worse, they will lock you up. There are police officers who don't care. They don't care so long as they're given the order by their boss, by the government. They don't care if it means that they're going to destroy vaccines or medication that people need, so long as they're following their orders. And that's how this kind of thing gets enforced. The cops don't care. They say, we're just doing what we're told. We're just following orders. We're just doing our job. At a certain point, we need to restore humanity to the system because rigidity doesn't work. That's where the problems arise. But it's amazing to me. Did you have the story about a doctor who's like, it was going to go in the garbage? Shouldn't have I just used it? No. I love it. I remember when I was little, I went to a Burger King once, and they had a whole bunch of breakfast sandwiches that they were literally chucking in the garbage. And so me and my friends were like, yo, can we have those breakfast sandwiches? And they said, no, we can't give them away. We're like, well, you're throwing them away. You're wasting them. Just give them out. And they said, well, the problem is, their boss explained, if they start giving out all of the breakfast sandwiches at 11:30 because they have to throw them out, then people will just stop coming in for breakfast at 10 a.m. to buy it. Then they'll just show up at 11:30 for the free sandwich. So it's better to just throw it all in the trash. Now, I certainly get the logic, but I think that's insane. That's a problem with the rigidity in the system. Now, when you start getting into the racial quotas for healthcare, that's when you lost me. I used to be a very big proponent of universal healthcare. Then I started hearing them say things like ban private insurance. And I said, no, we don't want to do that. We want universal healthcare with private insurance. That makes sense. Then I started saying perhaps the best thing we do now is just a public option. So we have a public system and a private system. Now I'm even getting away from that. A public system right now, I'm not entirely convinced would be a good thing if they're trying to make medicine based on race. Sorry, that's not going to solve the problem. It's going to make the problem worse. We want to make sure that everybody has access to healthcare. That I can respect. I liked the idea that we could just honestly pay a lot. That's right. To make sure that people have some kind of base level care. It's expensive. And the challenge is, I don't believe I have the right to force someone to pay into it, which is what makes it really hard to implement systems like that. Cooperation should be voluntary. So here's the idea. Here's my longstanding position. Base level care is covered. If you break your hand, if you get the flu, you can go to a doctor and you don't accrue that debt. Now, you don't accrue that debt. My understanding is that in some places that actually does work that way, and in some places it doesn't. I'm saying that we should be able to get our bones set when they break, or if someone needs Tamiflu. But if you have a very serious illness that takes a ton of resources, then maybe you'll need to have private insurance. That makes a lot of sense. I just like to see a system in place where we can make sure people aren't dying in the streets. The problem? They have showed us their hand. They have said right now with this vaccine rollout, if you give us the reins of controlling healthcare, you will be rejected based on your race. I'm not okay with that. My family dealt with that racism stuff a long time ago, and y'all want to bring it back? No. You want to talk about class issues? I'm more than happy to set up free clinics and talk about nonprofits to provide, healthcare to low-income individuals and areas that tend to have historical poverty, which you'll then see an overlap with race issues. But if you want to tell me that we're going to start just basing who gets healthcare when on race, no way, dude. I'm not having it. Now you want to come to me and say universal health care. My problem? What happens when there's some 12-year-old white kid who breaks his hand and it shows up to the ER and they're like, you got to wait because you're white and we have a racial quota system. We have the progressive stack. That means if someone comes in later and doesn't matter what they're, injured with or sick with, based on race, we're going to determine who gets to go in and who doesn't. Nah, that's a nightmare scenario. That'll result in people with guns shooting other people. That'll result in buildings being burned down. You know what, man? You want to see chaos. Have a dad bring his sick son into a hospital and then have them say, sorry, not him. He's the wrong race. And see what that dad does. There's a movie. I think it's with Denzel Washington. I can't remember what it was. It's a really good movie. He's got a kid. And I think it's like he goes to a hospital and he holds everyone hostage because his kid's going to die. People are willing to go great lengths to save their children, even if it means sacrificing themselves. It's bad enough when we have out of reach healthcare due to cost. That's scary stuff, man. It really is. I understand that not every disease has a cure. Sometimes people get terminal illnesses that they can do literally nothing about. Sometimes there are illnesses or diseases that people get, have, or inherit that can be cured, but it costs way too much, which creates a serious problem. Someone goes to the hospital and says, please save my child's life. And they say the treatment for this ailment, this illness, is $3 million. There's no way we or anyone else could afford it. The people then get angry. You have the cure, but you won't give it. The problem is the labor that goes into the production of these treatments is extensive. Sometimes, and don't get me wrong, we have a very serious problem with the healthcare industry in terms of pricing. Definitely think so. We need hard reform. But there are certain circumstances where the medication is expensive for legitimate reasons. Hard to source, hard to create, hard to put together. And that means there is a path towards saving an individual and they won't be able to get it. I don't know how you solve that problem. The labor that goes into inventing and creating the cures costs money, and the system must be sustained. So if a business invests $10 million to develop a cure for something and they get one out of it, how do they fund that machine to make more unless they charge a lot for that medication, which is tough. But what happens if someone goes to the hospital and they say, my child has this ailment, can you cure him? And they say, there is no known cure. Well, then people don't blame the system. It seems like we're a victim of our own success in many ways, that we'll develop a cure for something, and then once it's known about, everyone will demand it, even if we can't synthesize it fast enough. That's one of the main issues with universal healthcare. And I think it's horrifying. The idea that, the cure exists, but they're not going to give it to you because of cost. How do you pay for it? This is why some people advocate for universal healthcare. And this is where I actually say, yeah, I kind of agree. If we all pitched in, we could save this person's life, maybe produce more of this life-saving medication. And I like that idea greatly. I absolutely love it. I'd be willing to spend way more money in taxes if I knew that money was going towards saving people's lives. If I saw somebody on the ground and they were bleeding out, and then there was a pile of money on fire, and I knew that I could run over and stomp the fire out and save the money, but the person would die, of course I would forego the money. I don't care about money. I'd run over and put pressure on the wound. Even if I didn't know if I could save this person, I would sacrifice a lot to save somebody. I would give a lot. I would actually pay someone's medical bills if I knew I could save their life. And I've helped people out several times in the past with things like that. The problem here is racial equity and quotas that I will never support. So you've lost me on that one, 100%. I will not let someone die based on their race. That is psychotic. And that's where we're going. They want racial quotas in giving people this vaccine. That is psychotic. We want to make sure people get the vaccine. And we want to make sure everyone has equal and fair access. And class plays a big role in this. I do not want anyone to die just because they are poor. And I'd be willing to do what I had to do to make sure we can save them. The problem is, if you told me we were going to implement a universal healthcare system that was going to make sure the poor don't suffer and people who can't afford it don't die, I'd say, I love it. Absolutely. I've worked for nonprofits to help people who are sick and can't afford it. I've donated. I've paid off people's bills. But if you told me that system would result in other people who are poor, but of the wrong race being rejected, then I would say absolutely not. That's psychotic. That's where we're going. That's why this story freaks me out. Now, I don't know if that's the exact reason, but I think this doctor did the right thing based on the story being told. If he had the vaccine and it was going to go bad, best use it. There's one factor in this. They mention he didn't know if it would have been used or not. And that's where you start to ask some questions. He said that if he went back to the facility, it may have gone to waste, so he decided just to use it instead. Okay. Seems like the people he gave it to weren't necessarily his family or friends. Some of them were. Not all of them. But maybe it was just because his friend's friend or his friend's family. Maybe he really did steal these. I don't know. In the end, we have a story where equity became an issue that identified what this guy had done. Too many Indian names, they noticed. That's scary. The line's being pushed further and further, and the cliffside's eroding, my friends. You know, I can talk about it all day and night. I just hope you're paying attention to what comes following this, because there will come a time when you may be holding your child saying, save him, and we'll say, what's his race? Sorry. No, thank you. We fought hard to end that era. Very hard. I should say my ancestors, the people who came before me, fought very hard, and they succeeded. And now we're in a new fight because the racists, the racial identitarians are gaining control of the cultural institutions, and they have it. And now they're going to start pushing Nazi-like policy. That's where we're at. I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. It's a different channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.